Yeah, hi and welcome everyone. I am Rashmit Arora. I am the agricultural economist at Mercy for Animals. And today's webinar will be hosted by me and my colleague Courtney Dillard, who is our social change researcher. Um, I am excited to share the Farmed Animal Opportunity Index with all of you, which is a tool, intended to aid animal protection organizations in making better decisions about their international expansion plans. Um, so the structure of today's talk will be something like 20 to 25 minutes of an overview, followed by 10 minutes of additional considerations and strategic applications from Courtney, and that will be followed by a Q&A session. We might be able to wrap up before the intended time, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. So this project was a year-long undertaking for our research team alongside other ongoing projects. It started out with an interest in our senior leadership to expand to Southeast or East Asia. And we didn't really know where to get started in order to, make the most sensible and data driven decision. And so that's where the idea of this index was born. And an initial version of this index was created in sometime around summer of 2020. And that version contained only 19 countries in our region of interest, which was Southeast, East, and Central Asia. So based on that, based on that Asia index, 6 countries were selected for detailed scoping studies to determine where it would make most sense for MFA to enter. Courtney will actually delve deeper into that portion of our analysis. We then expanded the index to be global with 60 countries. And that's the version of the index that we will be sharing with you today. So rather than preparing slides, what we thought was it would be best to just go through the website and the tool and the documents that come on the website to go over those with all of you, so that when you visit the website, you'll know exactly what's happening where. So this is the landing page for the FAOI, which is data.mercyforanimals.org. And as you can see from the definition here, right? So we defined the FAOI as a tool that ranks 60 countries on their potential for effective interventions using 19 relevant socioeconomic indicators. So on the landing page, when you scroll down, you arrive at the tool. This right here is the tool, and we'll be going into further detail on how to best use the tool. But before we do that, I'd like to go over some of the methodological and design inputs that went in to show you how we actually get to the conclusions that we're sharing through this tool. So this right here is the methodology document that is outlinked from that same main data page. And what this does is basically outline all the different variables that the index considers, and then the statistical and mathematical methodology behind the index for those who are interested. So theoretically, right, the FAOI has 4 dimensions in that our decision for which countries to target in terms of their potential for work related to farmed animal protection is based on 4 different pillars of, I would say, decision making. And these 4 pillars are scale, tractability, and neglectedness, as well as global influence. Now, the first 3 are commonly, have been spoken of and discussed in effective altruism circles, but global influence is our addition to the uh, to the discourse surrounding, where should we actually be putting our efforts and resources. So um, in our index, however, right, because it relies on publicly available large quantifiable data sets, neglectedness was not a pillar we could adequately measure. In that, neglectedness would be something that measures how neglected is the issue of animal protection or animal welfare in a particular country. We tried to work out, several different proxies, but nothing actually fit the bill for our 60 country scope. But yeah, so in this version of the index, which is the first iteration of the index that we put out publicly, scale, tractability, and global influence are the three dimensions or pillars that we consider. Now, the variables that go into these are as follows. So scale, this dimension captures the scale of the problem. Now, naturally, this is a very important dimension to consider. And so the two variables that we look at are farmed land animals and farmed fishes, as well as the human population of a particular country. Now, within a dimension, right, these variables are aggregated together to make a representative figure for this dimension, which is the dimensional score. I'll get into that in a second. Um, the next dimension is tractability, which is actually, I would say, a central pillar of our discussion. Um, and what tractability seeks to answer is, if we were to actually enter these countries and intervene, how likely are we to succeed? And we think this is an often overlooked aspect, and in terms of the movement in its current state. So the types of variables that we look at in tractability, and before I get into those, I will point out that these variables are classified as generic tractability and not movement specific tractability. So by generic tractability, I mean these are general indicators of the sociopolitical and economic state of a country, and not necessarily factors that are directly related to animal protection. Now, this is a key distinction, and Courtney will get into this into much more depth when she speaks. But the variables considered here was percentage of income spent on food, which the way it was interpreted was that the higher the percentage of income spent on food, the lower the likelihood of interventions for farmland animals. Basically saying that, if people don't have any disposable income, they cannot attribute that income towards higher welfare products or support organizations that might need philanthropic funding. Um, the next is gross national income per capita, essentially saying that the higher the income in a particular country, the higher the likelihood of farmed animal interventions. Urban population, which is again, the higher the percentage of people residing in urban areas, um, the higher the likelihood of intervention. Education, which is again having a similar direct relationship to the outcome, which is farmed animal interventions. And at this point, I just quickly like to take a pause and um, um, clarify something, which is that as an organization, our goal is to better the lives of farmed animals and end factory farming. If our goal was to improve education in a country, then assuming that higher education implies higher opportunity for interventions uh, could be contrary to where we should be targeting our resources. However, in our context, educational is simply a situational indicator towards how open people might be towards animal protection messaging. I know it feels like the index is self-selecting more privileged countries, and to an extent it is, but what we're saying is that in a country with lower levels of tractability, lower likelihoods of success, there will be all these other non-animal issues that need to be addressed first before we can actually start helping animals. It's the unfortunate truth of how our economies are structured and where animal protection falls into the existing priorities of the global population. That's one of the assumptions that we're making. So please look at these tractability factors as situational indicators and not value-based judgments. Um, so the next is internet penetration. We assume that the higher the percentage of the population that has access to the internet or uses the internet, is the specific phrasing, the higher the likelihood of effective interventions. The scope and nature of giving and volunteerism. How do people, behave in those two aspects, which are key to several organizations? The state of globalization, and then the state of corruption. The what's the prevalence of a democracy? These are the different types of indicators that were considered in this tractability portion. And there's more. So there's gender equality, political stability and absence of violence and terrorism. What's the size of an informal sector in a particular country? And innovation in food systems. So collectively, right, the scores for these variables are aggregated and they make a dimensional score for tractability. Now, the last pillar of our index is global influence. And this essentially caters to our belief that policies and trends in highly influential countries are more likely um, than those in less influential countries to affect other countries. This is calculated on the basis of three indicators. One was global influence, which was measured by the Elcano Global Presence Index. We only take the cultural influence pillar of the broader index, which looks at the different types of cultural aspects of a particular country and how they influence the rest of the world. Then meat trade, which is the absolute value of trade in meat, and then live animal trade, another important variable. So essentially, data on all of these um, indicators is collected, and then it's treated in a lot of different ways. I'm happy to share the Excel file here to give you an idea of what the calculations behind the index look like. I'm gonna stop this share real quick and share something else. Screen. Um, okay, so if we look at this first raw data tab right here, this is what the data collection process looked like. So we collected data on all these different aspects, and naturally there was missing data for certain countries. The missing data were imputed using appropriate multiple imputation techniques. And then once we had a complete data set, which is what you see here, um, we transformed these variables to fit into a 0 to 100 scale. Because if you think about it, a human population, which is measured in number of humans, and gross national income per capita, which is measured in dollars, can't really be aggregated together because they're measured on different scales. So these are transformed into a 0 to 100 scale to capture the same distribution as is in the original data set. And then the transformed values are aggregated into those dimensional values, right? So they're aggregated basically in terms of a simple average. So if you think about it, China here, which has a value of 100 for scale, if I go to the transformed values and look at China, well, it had 100 for number of animals and it had 100 for human population, which is essentially saying that it has the highest number of animals that are animals and fish that are killed, and then also the highest human population in the world. And if I take an average of those, it's naturally 100. So yeah, that was a simple arithmetic average, and then tractability is calculated in a similar way, and so is global influence for all of those countries. Now, the FAOI is measured using a geometric aggregation of these three um, dimensions. And the geometric aggregation is based on these weights that we specify right here. So it takes into account the relative importance of scale, tractability, and global influence, and then basically spits out this FAOI score, which is then our ultimate, the thing that we want to use. Now, the cool thing about the FAOI is that we allow organizations and users, such as yourselves, to tweak these weights. Now, um, I'd like to quickly share how MFA came to the conclusion of these weights. And it was driven by something known as a factor analysis. What a factor analysis does is it looks at the way the data is structured, and it allocates weights to different groupings of different variables. And what the factor analysis told us was that the weights, which you could see here, um, that is the total the variation in the data set that is explained by any of these particular dimensions, was as follows. So per the factor analysis, the weight for tractability should be 69%, scale should be 16%, and regional influence should be 15%. And as you can see, this is not exactly the weights that MFA has prescribed. And the reason for that is that we don't firmly believe that uh, we believe that there are additional considerations to be made, and value judgments and expert opinion has an important role to play in how we allocate these weights. However, as you'll see, the structure of the weights is still the same, in that tractability is assigned a higher weight than scale, and scale is assigned a higher weight than global influence. Um, but as I said, if you as an organization come to a different conclusion and you say that, well, we actually value scale more than or we value scale and tractability equally, then you could change this weight to 40%, and you can change that weight to 40% too. And as long as the weights are summing up to 100, right, you will have a new ranking of the countries based on your own priorities as an organization. And as you can see, there's been some changes in the rankings. India, which was actually in fourth place, has moved up to third place. And if you think about it, that makes sense, because we were initially at 25% of the weight being allocated to scale, but now we're saying that 40% of our decision should be determined by scale. And so India, a country with a really high human population, right, all of a sudden a variable that it performed well at was being rewarded. So India moved up in the ranking because of that. And additionally, another thing that helped India was that our tractability, in terms of how likely are you to succeed in a particular country, the importance of that went down. So in a variable such as corruption, where in India there is a lot of low and high levels of low level and high level corruption in the government, um, we're suddenly putting less of an importance to that, and so that also helps India, and it moves up in the ranking. However, I'm gonna just revert back to our original weights, um, and show you that in this weighting, as you can see, Germany is actually in the third spot and not India. So I hope that illustrates how the index is constructed, and I'll quickly jump over to the tool now, and show you how you can actually go about using this on your own. So for you to use this, you won't have to deal with the Excel sheet or any kind of data. All you need to do is go to the data.mercyforanimals.org homepage, and once you get to this, which is the actual dashboard, and sometimes this takes up to 30 seconds or so to load, so be patient with it if you don't see it immediately. So I can go here and we have a map of all the countries. And if I simply want to, I'll stick, if I simply just stick to the weights that MFA has prescribed, and I don't really want to change anything. I want to and I want to see how different countries are performing. You can hover over any of these countries, and as you hover, you'll see a bunch of different information. You'll see what the country's global rank is. You'll see what its regional rank is, and then you'll see how it performed in each of the different indicators. In terms of ranking, you can also look at this table right here, which is just a tabular format of the same thing, to see how countries are performing. And if you want to change the weights, right, like we did earlier, um, all you got to do is change the weight. And you'll see an error message that pops up here. Unless these three dimensions add up to 100%, it won't actually recalculate the score based on whatever your priorities are. So if once I update that, the index will recalculate and repopulate when it's ready. Um, I have a lot of tabs open, so I'm not sure what is happening. It's my computer's just struggling right now.
Oh, it's this thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna refresh the page. Okay, so let's hope this works this time.
Should be 35%.
Oh, sorry, this is 20. Sorry, my bad. I was not doing basic math, and I am an economist, so that's bad. Anyway, I was not looking at scale at all. But yeah, so as you can see, it recalculated and the index works. That's great. So I'll go back to our original weights, which were 25, 55, and 20. Um, so it repopulate now to the original weights. And so, yeah, you can change the weights and get a ranking based on whatever your priorities are as an organization. However, we do recommend that you maintain the structure of the factor analysis, which is that tractability should be weighed more than scale, and scale should be weighed more than global influence. Um, Now, another feature here is this display by option. So you can, if you're just simply trying to gather data on regions, you can change this to region, and what it'll do is it'll show you different rankings for different regions. So in terms of overall viability, Anglo America is the most viable region in the world for interventions, followed by Southeast and East Asia. However, you can also change this to only look at one of the key pillars. So if I change it to scale, which is one of the dimensions, you'll see that the scale of the problem is actually far greater in South, Southeast, and East Asia compared to Anglo America. And if I were to change to tractability, well, tractability is actually the greatest in Oceania, which is Australia and New Zealand, basically. And yeah, so but if I go to global influence, you'll see that Anglo America is at the top again. The FAOI is essentially the weighted aggregate of all of those different pillars. Now, below the tool is the data table. This contains all the raw data that you saw in the Excel spreadsheet I shared earlier. So for anyone, say, writing an article on animal protection, needing some quick data and quick numbers to back up their argument, this is a good place to go to and essentially get those numbers. And if you go to the methodology document that's linked below, you'll be able to um, you'll be able to look at the source that the data came from and cite that accordingly as well. The citation should be fairly quick. Um, um, So yeah, the data is available here for other researchers looking to do analyses using this data. You can click this download button down here. And if you select cross tab, you can select what type of data export you want, and you can export the data accordingly in an Excel or a CSV format and use it in your own analyses. That being said, I will hand it over now to Courtney to talk about some additional considerations related to the index.
Thanks, Rashmit. Can you bring up the read more document? So the first thing I want to do, of course, is commend Rashmit for the excellent work that he did to make this index a reality. This was a very heavy lift over a long period of time, and he certainly was the lead on it. So I'm just honored to be a part of this project. I really only have two things that I want to speak to briefly today. The first is the importance of using a mixed methods approach for decision making in these types of situations. And the second is the way in which the index is used not only to help us understand where to work, but also how to work. So to begin, I want to underline Rashmit's point that the index should not be used as a standalone tool for strategic decision making. So this is just a jump off point for us for the research that we did for Southeast Asia, for example. We used the index as a way to narrow the field of countries in that region, and it gave us a strong sense of which of the countries we were most likely to see some success in, right? Once we had that sense of where we might be interested in pursuing a deeper dive, we took the first 6 countries from the index and we did extensive scoping studies in each of these countries. So it is not enough just to have the list and have a country at the top of the list. You need to ask additional questions. And so that's where the scoping studies came in. With the scoping studies, what we did was we hired contractors on the ground that were in a good position to do a deeper dive on key variables, speaking to things like cultural norms, religion, the role of food and animals in society, and basic variables that are at the heart of good decision making in these situations, like who is the audience and what is the context. We also conducted interviews with advocates on the ground to better understand what advocacy looked like there, what kind of barriers they had encountered, what opportunities they saw, what other groups were active in the country, how many of those groups might consider working on farmed animal issues. So there were a lot of conversations that were taking place once we had a sense of what countries we wanted to look at more deeply. And you can see a long list here of the kinds of things that we asked the contractors to investigate in the scoping studies, each of which took a fair amount of time to kind of understand at a deeper level. So in regards to tractability specifically, which we have focused on in this conversation and also in the index, one thing that became apparent is that the indicators that Rashmit pointed out were, as he noted, general tractability, right? How are people doing economically? What's the level of education? Now, these things are important for us to understand in a broad way, but quite frankly, they don't tell us much about how our work, right, the issues that we're trying to work on, how successful we might be in that work. So we consider that to be generic tractability. We decided that in order to better understand movement-specific tractability, we're going to have to delve into topics like how people view farmed animals, what is their level of openness to food innovation, how likely might they be not only just to volunteer, which is in general tractability, but to volunteer on animal issues. So this was a kind of an eye-opening moment in our process when we started to do a literature review and see how few articles there were, how few surveys or interviews or focus groups or anything like that that had been done in the countries we were interested in. So basically, we did not think it was a good idea to go into a country without knowing what people thought about our issues and how likely they were to act in the ways that we hope they would, like sign petitions or potentially pursue well, whether it would be a protest or shopping with better kinds of welfare standards in mind. We wanted to ask questions about that. So we developed a survey that really was specific to farmed animals and people's perceptions, their knowledge of them, their attitudes towards them, their attitudes towards plant-based eating, and also their behavioral intentions regarding support for an organization like ours. We deployed that, and then we used the findings from that as another point of comparison. And that is where we really understood a little bit better about our specific possibilities in a country. Now that exercise started us thinking about the importance of broadening that out to a multi-country survey that would fit nicely within the index in the 60 countries we were looking at. And I am happy to report that we are already in the process of working with other organizations, many of whom are likely on this call, to improve that survey and to look into what it would take to do a multi-country survey across a variety of regions to better understand the potential we have in different places with a focus on people's thinking on our issues. That's the first thing I wanted to talk about, right, is that we need mixed methods when we go in and start thinking about strategic international expansion. The second thing I just wanted to talk about, and I could talk about this for a long time, but it's not the point of this webinar. So I just want to talk about when we were thinking about how the index and the other research methods that we used have informed not just our thinking about what we should, where we should go, but how we should work. And I'd like, Reshma, if you could just go down to this table at the bottom. When we look at this table, we see some of the dimensions that we were talking about at the heart of the index. And these are tracked in terms of our understanding of social change. In general, we believe that we are much more likely to be successful at institutional change where we can harness people power through a sympathetic public and a strong advocacy community. We also think that we're more likely to get those things in particular types of countries where there's high global influence, high tractability. Those are already likely in place to a degree. And as a result, we can kind of start by pursuing institutional change. On the other hand, there are places where those things have not happened yet. Our issues are not on the radar for people. People are not prioritizing these topics, and maybe there's just been no movement building specifically for farmed animals, right? And so if that's the case, then maybe the work we need to do there is more about raising public awareness, building the movement out so that we can create a strong resource that then gets the people who are decision makers and power holders to take us seriously. So when we think about the research that we're doing here, we're doing it to better understand the places we're interested in working in, which ones we're likely to be effective in, but also what we should be doing while we're there. Because we don't want to invest resources in things that we will not likely be successful with. So there's a lot more to be said about this kind of thinking through the relationship between people power and institutional change, but that's not the point of this webinar. So I'll leave it at that, but I do encourage all users of the index to spend time with the additional considerations or read more document, because we did create this index as a tool in a multi-tool toolbox for making decisions in terms of strategic international expansion. So we encourage you to look at it that same way. I think that's everything I would add, Reshma. Yeah, just excited to be a part of the project and hope that it can be useful to the movement.
Thanks, Courtney. And I hope the same. If there are any questions at this point, feel free to put them in the chat box or unmute yourself and share any questions or thoughts that you might have.
Hey, this is Megan. Great job. Fascinating, exciting. Just wondering about, did you look at the viability of getting financial support into these countries? As we know, it's almost impossible with laws changing in India and China. Was that anywhere in here and I'm missing it?
Courtney, do you want to talk about how legal looked at the scoping studies? Mm-hmm.
Sure, no, I can speak to that. That is certainly a chapter in the scoping studies and in all of them. And that question was important. We asked each of the consultants on the ground to look into what kind of charity status we might be able to obtain, what the implications of different charity statuses were, and also the implication of foreign donations and yeah, tax implications, those kinds of things. So while I agree with you, it's a changing or shifting landscape, we did try to capture that in the more qualitative data in the scoping studies.
Yeah, and in the index, I'll say that it has a proxy variable, which is ease of setting up a business. It's an indicator that the World Bank has, and it's essentially looks at, you know, what's the cost of setting up a business and other things, which is, it's not directly what a nonprofit is, you know, but so that's why we call it a proxy variable. And the other thing I want to, you know, like air some caution towards is that there is a risk of double counting, right? In the sense of, if something has already been considered in the index, right, it shouldn't be that particular country shouldn't be penalized for it in your later qualitative analysis as well. So, you know, I spoke about India and corruption, and if the index is already penalizing India for corruption, your qualitative discussion shouldn't again be based on corruption, for example, right? If you come back and you say that, well, you know, India is ranking really well, but it's a really corrupt country, so we shouldn't go there. You're essentially, you know, dueling and doubling down on something that the index has already considered. So as much as you can, your qualitative considerations post the index should be things that the index was not able to capture at all, such as the legal framework and charity status and other things, um, as Courtney just mentioned.
I have a question. Hi, it's Malou from Germany. I'm currently doing a similar analysis. It's definitely not as profound as yours, so it's very interesting to have this input right now. I am struggling at one point. Maybe you had that experience as well. Did you also look at other organizations that are currently working in that area in the country? Because that is something very confusing sometimes. And you also have to figure out how efficient are they working in the country. So what exactly are you doing in that area?
I can speak to that briefly, and Rashmi, I'd love you to jump in on this. I think this became one of the points of conversation around neglectedness for us, right? So it became very difficult to understand if who was there, and we did a fair amount of work on that. And then to not only figure out who is there, but are they working on farmed animal issues? And then just to your point, how effective are they in working on those issues, which was very difficult for us to get a sense of, even having contractors on the ground. So I think that the point of difficulty for you is mirrored in our own experience with this. And I will say that World Animal Net was very helpful to us to kind of get a better sense of some of the organizations in Southeast Asia. But this is also work that needs to be done, I think, especially because we do think that neglectedness is an important aspect, but we haven't been able to really kind of get our hands around how to measure it. And how to, even if we know how to measure it, how to go get the numbers that we need, right, to make that assessment. Did you have anything else on that, Rashmi? I don't know if you had some other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The World Animal Net was our it was what we, you know, were moving towards in terms of incorporating it. But the issue, I think the biggest issue was that we didn't know which animals had a focus on farmed animals, right? There were lots of nonprofits listed in you know, countries such as India or China, and you know, you didn't know, and most of them, for example, in India, were like stray dog rescues, or you know, similar organizations. So especially when it comes to neglectedness of this issue of farmed animals, is where we struggle. And for the index, you need, like, if we've collected data from all these different super reliable, you know, government level data sets, having an unreliable, non-robust measure would actually reduce the power of the overall score that you're getting. So that's why we just like went towards not including neglectedness at all in this measure, at least. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts?
I had a question. Thank you for doing this. I think this is really helpful for the number of farmed animals. I assume that when you say fish, it also includes shellfish because you probably took the FAO data, which includes shellfish.
So you can go into our methodology document and see the list of species that were included in that. If you're wondering why it's land animals and fishes combined as one figure, they're different, areas of the problem. Uh, Lots of different variables were tweaked or aggregated or combined in this way because they were significantly correlated with each other, and then also like having the same impact on the outcome variable. In a composite indicator like this, the better your ratio of number of countries to number of variables is, the more reliable the indicator is. And so our goal was to minimize the number of indicators as much as possible. And so, yeah, that's why we combined land animals and fishes into one figure. But yeah, for specific, what the specifications on the FAO website were, please just check out our methodology document.
Thank you.
I don't know if Walter is here, but if he is, he could probably answer your question directly.
I have another question regarding the data. Did you look at im and export data as well? Production and consumption? Did you feel that it was that it had a big impact?
Yeah, so we have two variables, right? We have meat trade and then live animal trade, which looks at exports minus imports and basically what the net value is. And initially, those are variables we put under scale, but then we move them under global influence because actually the factor analysis allocated them in that way. And then once it did that, we also thought theoretically it made sense to have them under global influence. So yeah, the index does capture live animal and meat exports and imports. Any other questions, thoughts? Still have some time, so I mean, we don't need to stay here the entire time. But yeah, if you'd like to share something, please go ahead.
I actually have one more question for you. The countries you have right now, I assume you chose them because the data that you were looking for is available for them. Will you update them as new data becomes available? For example, a lot of countries in Africa are not really on there right now.
Yeah, that was largely a data-driven decision. So a lot of the specifications are again in the methodology, but like any countries that had missing data for more than 25% of the indicators were eliminated. So we had a longer list, which eventually came down to these ones. And then there was also just some, general judgments of does it make sense to even consider this country at this stage, because it's likely to perform really low on the index overall. So I'm not going to call out any single countries by name, but you can imagine certain countries that just didn't make sense to have in the index because maybe the population was just so small, or yeah. All right. Well, if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I'm gonna go back to this page, go back right to the end, and share this email address with you. If you have any questions regarding this, feel free to reach out to us at research@mercyforanimals.org. Someone from the team will get back to you. And yeah, we really hope this helps organizations in, figuring out where to go in this, increasingly global context. Yeah, it's our honor to share this as a gift of sorts with everyone and have this open access tool and the data that goes with it be available to everyone. So yeah, hope you find it useful. Courtney, I don't know if you had any last thoughts.
No. I think, yeah, I look forward to of hearing more over the next few months of how people are interacting with this tool. And we do plan on updating the data, I think at least on a yearly basis to try and keep it up to date. Yeah, besides that, I think I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, then thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll share the recording at with everyone that attended after the meeting. Okay, thanks.